So, hello and welcome back yet again to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I am surprised and not surprised to find that we are almost at the end of. The chapters, at least the final chapter, is quite long, but we only have one, two, three, four chapters left in this book, which is either going to be two, three, or four nights of reading because these chapters do get a little bit longer, and I'm trying not to make these like 2 hour long videos. Also, sincere apologies if last night's chapter, I don't know what happened. It's just blame me. I didn't get the chapter markers in, and I let YouTube put the ads in, so at least at first there were way more ads than I ever put into my videos. If you hit the little box that YouTube has that just lets them place ads wherever they want, I swear they put them every 30 seconds. And yeah, I that's on me. So sorry about that if you had to sit through 80 bazillion ads in last night's. It's fixed now, but yeah, that is totally on me. This one will be definitely done properly. So yeah, we left off on kind of a cliffhanger with old Victor spending a little bit of time lost at sea. I mean, it sounds like it was just all on him. I don't have a lot of sympathy towards Victor. I don't like him very much. I think he's got whatever is coming for him in this little village is just what he's got coming. But it does sound like maybe the monster has set him up for something, because we left him being taken into custody and before some sort of magistrate. So that is what we are going to do. We're either going to do one or two chapters tonight. Not really sure. We shall see when I finish this one what we are at time wise, but I might draw this out a little bit. Also, if you are interested, the next public domain book that we're going to be reading is the one that got the second number of votes, which is Beverly of Grosstock, which I've done a little bit of research into and looks like it could either be an interesting book or a terrible book. Hard to say, but it does have a public domain movie adaptation. So I was like, huh, it was popular enough that it got a movie. Interesting. So that will be our next book, but we're probably going to be on Frankenstein for the rest of the week, or most of the rest of the week. Anyway, enough waffling, enough back and forth. Let's jump back in to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Volume 3, Chapter 4. I was soon introduced into the presence of the magistrate, an old benevolent man with calm and mild manners. He looked upon me, however, with some degree of severity, and then, turning towards my conductors, he asked who appeared as witnesses on this occasion. About a half a dozen men came forward, and one, being selected by the magistrate, he then deposed that he had been out fishing for the night before with his son and brother-in-law, his brother-in-law's name being Daniel Nugent, when about 10 o'clock they observed a strong northerly blast rising, and they accordingly put in for port. It was a very dark night. As the moon had not yet risen, they did not land at the harbor, but, as they had been accustomed to, at a creek about 2 miles below the harbor. He walked on first, carrying part of the fishing tackle, and his companions followed behind him at some distance. As this man was proceeding along the sands, he struck his foot against something, and he fell at his length along the ground. His companions came to assist him, and by the light of their lanterns they found that he had fallen on the body of a man who was to all appearances dead. Their first supposition was that it was the corpse of some person who had been drowned and was thrown on the shore by the waves, but upon examination, they found that the clothes were not wet, and even that the body was not cold. They instantly carried it to the cottage of an old woman near that spot and endeavored, but in vain, to restore it to life. It appeared to be a handsome young man, about 25 years of age. He had apparently been strangled, for there was no sign of any violence at all except the black mark of fingers around his neck. The first part of this deposition did not in the least interest me, but when the mark of the fingers was mentioned, I remembered the murder of my brother, and I felt myself extremely agitated. My limbs trembled, and a mist came over my eyes, which obliged me to lean upon a chair for support. The magistrate observed me with a keen eye, and, of course, drew unfavorable ideas from my manner. The son then confirmed his father's account, but when Daniel Nugent was called, he swore positively that just before the fall of his companion, he had seen a boat with a single man in it, just a little ways from the shore, and as far as he could judge by the light of a few stars, it was the same boat in which I had just landed. Then a woman was deposed that she lived near the beach and had been standing at the door of her cottage waiting for the return of the fisherman about an hour before she heard of the discovery of the body, and she had seen a boat with only one man in it push off from the part of the shore where the corpse had afterwards been found. Another woman confirmed the account of the fisherman having brought the body to her house and having not been cold. They put it onto a bed, and they had rubbed it, and Daniel had gone to the town for an apothecary, but alas, the life had been quite gone. Several other men were then examined concerning my landing, and they agreed with the strong north wind that had arisen during the night. It was very probable that I had beaten around for many hours, and had thusly been obliged to return nearly to the same spot from which I had departed. Besides, they observed that it appeared that I had brought the body from another place, and it was quite likely that, as I did not appear to know the shore, I might have put into the harbor ignorant of the distance of the town from the place where I had left the corpse. Mr. Kerwin, on hearing this evidence, desired that I should be taken into a room where the body lay for interment, and that it might then be observed what effect the sight of it would produce upon me. This idea was probably suggested by the extreme agitation I had exhibited when the mode of the murder had been described, and thus I was accordingly conducted by the magistrate and a few other people to the inn. I could not help being struck by the strange coincidences that had taken place during this eventful night, but knowing that I had been conversing with several persons on the island I had inhabited about the time the body had been found, I was perfectly tranquil as to the consequences of this whole affair. I entered the room where the corpse lay, and I was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations on seeing it? I feel still parched with horror, and I cannot reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering in agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate and the witnesses passed like a dream from my memory when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched in front of me. I gasped for breath, and throwing myself on the body, I exclaimed, "Have my murderous machinations deprived you also, Henry, of life? 2 I have already destroyed. Other victims await their destiny, but you, Clerval, my friend, my benefactor." The human frame could no longer support the agonies that I was enduring, and I was carried out of the room in strong convulsions. A fever followed this. I lay for 2 months on the point of death. My ravings, as I after learned, were frightful. I called myself the murderer of William, of Justine, and of Clerval. Sometimes I begged my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend by which I was tormented, and at other times I could feel the fingers of the monster already around my neck, and I screamed with agony and terror. Fortunately, as I spoke my native language, only Mr. Kerwin understood me, but my gestures and cries were sufficient to scare the other witnesses. Why did I not die? More miserable than man ever was before, why did I not sink into forgetfulness and rest? Death takes many blooming children, the only hopes of their parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope, and the next day prey for the worms and decay of the tomb? Of what was I made that I could thus resist so many shocks when, like the turning of the wheel, continually renewed this torture? But I was doomed to live. And in 2 months I found myself, as though awakening from a dream, in a prison, stretched on a wretched bed, surrounded by jailers, turnkeys, bolts, and all the miserable apparatuses of a dungeon. It was morning. I remember that, when I awoke to understanding, I had forgotten the particulars of what had happened, and I only felt as if some great misfortune had overwhelmed me. But when I looked around, and I saw the barred windows and the squalidness of the room in which I lay, it all flashed across my memory, and I groaned bitterly. This sound disturbed an old woman who was sleeping in the chair beside me. She was a hired nurse, the wife of one of the turnkeys, and her face expressed all those bad qualities which characterizes that class. The lines of her face were hard and rude, like that of persons accustomed to seeing without sympathizing on the sights of misery. Her tone expressed her entire indifference. She spoke to me in English, and the voice struck me as one that I had heard during my suffering. "Are you better now, sir?" she said. I replied in the same language, in a feeble voice, "I believe I am. But if it all be true, if indeed I did not dream, I am sorry that I am still alive to feel this misery and horror." "For that matter," said the old woman, "if you mean to be about the gentleman you murdered, I believe that it were better for you if you were dead, for I fancy it's going to go hard on you. However, that is none of my business. I am sent to nurse you and to get you well. I do my duty with a safe conscience. It were well if everybody else would do the same." I then turned with loathing from the woman who could utter such an unfeeling speech to a person that she had just saved from the edge of death. But I felt languid and unable to reflect on all that had passed. The entire series of my life appeared to me as just a dream. I sometimes doubted if indeed it were all true, for it never presented itself to my mind with the force of any reality. As the images that floated before me became more distinct, I grew feverish, and the darkness pressed around me. No one was near me who could soothe me with the gentle voice of love. No dear hand was supporting me. A physician came and prescribed medicines, and the old woman prepared them for me, but utter carelessness was visible from the first, and the expression of brutality was strongly marked in the face of the second. who could be interested in the fate of a murderer except for the hangman? These were my first reflections, but I soon learned that Mr. Kerwin had indeed shown me kindness. He had caused the best room in the prison to be prepared for me, although it was wretched, and it was he who had provided a physician and a nurse. It is true he seldom came to see me, for although he ardently desired to relieve the suffering of every human creature, he did not wish to be present at the agonies and miserable ravings of a murderer. He came, therefore, sometimes to see that I was not neglected, but his visits were short and came at long intervals. One day, while I was gradually recovering, I was seated in a chair, eyes half open, and my cheeks livid like those of death. I had been overcome by gloom and misery, and I often reflected that I had better seek death than desire to remain in a world which to me was just replete with wretchedness. At one time, I considered whether I should not declare myself guilty and suffer the penalty of the law. I was less innocent than poor Justine had been. These were my thoughts when the door of my room was opened and Mr. Kerwin entered. His face showed sympathy and compassion. He drew a chair close to mine, and he addressed me in French. "I fear this place is very shocking to you. Can I do anything to make you more comfortable?" "I thank you," I said, "but all that you mention is nothing to me. On the whole earth there is no comfort that I am capable of receiving." "I know," he said, "that the sympathy of a stranger can be but of little relief to one borne down as you are by such a strange misfortune, but you will, I hope, soon stop this melancholy, for doubtless evidence can easily be brought to free you from this criminal charge." "That is not my concern," I said. "I am, by a course of strange events, the most miserable of men. Persecuted and tortured as I have been, can death be any worse?" "Nothing indeed," he said, "could be more unfortunate and agonizing than the strange occurrences that have recently occurred. You were thrown by some surprising accident on this shore, renowned for its hospitality, and immediately seized and charged with murder. The first sight that was presented to your eyes was the body of your friend, murdered in such an unaccountable a manner, and placed, as it were, by some fiend across your path." As Mr. Kerwin said this, notwithstanding the agitation that I was enduring on this retrospective of my sufferings, I also felt considerable surprise at the knowledge that he seemed to possess concerning me. I suppose that some of this astonishment was on my face, for Mr. Kerwin hastened to say, "Immediately upon your being taken ill, all the papers that were on your person were brought to me, and I examined them so that I might discover some trace by which I could send to your relations as an account of your misfortune and illness. I found several letters, and among others, one which I discovered from its commencement to be from your father. I instantly wrote to Geneva. Nearly 2 months have gone by since the departure of my letter, but you are ill. Even now you tremble. You are not fit to be agitated." "This suspense," I said, "is 1,000 times worse than the most horrible events. Tell me, what new scene of death has been acted, and who am I now to lament?" "Your family is perfectly well," said Mr. Kerwin, with gentleness, "and someone, a friend, is coming to visit you." I Know not by what chain of thought the idea presented itself, but I instantly darted in my mind to the fact that the murderer might have come to mock my misery and taunt me with the death of Clerval as a new incitement for me to comply with his hellish wishes. I put my hand in front of my eyes and I cried in agony, "Oh, take him away! I cannot see him! For God's sake, don't let him enter!" Mr. Kerwin looked at me with a troubled face. He could not help regarding my exclamation as a presumption of guilt, and he said, rather severely, "I would have thought, young man, that the presence of your father would have been welcome instead of inspiring such repugnance." "Oh, my father!" I cried. Well, every feature and muscle was relaxed from agony to pleasure. "Is my father come? How kind, how very kind! But where is he? Why does he not come quickly?" My change of manner surprised and pleased the magistrate. Perhaps he thought my last exclamation was a momentary return of the delirium, and now he instantly resumed his former benevolence. He rose and quit the room with my nurse, and in a moment my father entered. Nothing, at this moment, could have given me greater pleasure than the arrival of my father. I stretched out my hand to him and cried, "Are you safe, papa? And Elizabeth and Ernst?" My father calmed me with assurances of their welfare, and endeavored, by dwelling on these subjects so interesting to my heart, to raise my desponding spirits. But he soon felt that a prison cannot be the place of cheerfulness. "What a place this is that you are inhabiting, my son," he said, looking sadly at the barred windows and the wretchedness of the room. "You traveled to seek happiness, but a fatality just seems to chase you, and poor Clerval." The name of my unfortunate murdered friend was an agitation too great to be endured in my weakness. I shed tears. "Alas, yes, my father," I said. "Some destiny of the most horrible kind hangs over me, and I must live to fulfill it, or surely I should have just died with Henry." We were not allowed to speak for any length of time, for the precarious state of my health rendered every precaution necessary that could ensure my tranquillity. Mr. Kerwin came in, and he insisted that my strength should not be exhausted by too much exertion. But the appearance of my father was to me like that of a good angel, and I gradually recovered my health. As my sickness left me, I was absorbed by a gloomy, black melancholy that nothing could alleviate. The image of Clerval was forever before me, ghastly, murdered. More than once, the agitation into which these reflections threw me made my friends dread that I relapse. Alas! Why did they persevere such a miserable, detested life? It was surely that I might fulfill my destiny, which is now drawing to a close. Soon, very soon, death will extinguish these throbbings, and it will relieve me from the mighty weight of my anguish which bears me into the dust, and in executing the award of justice, I will be able to rest. Then the appearance of death was distant, although the wish for it was ever in my thoughts, and I often sat for hours, motionless, speechless, wishing for some mighty revolution that might come and bury me and my destroyer in it. The season of the assizes approached. I had already been 3 months in prison, And although I was still weak and in continuous danger of relapse, I was obliged to travel nearly 100 miles to the country town where court was to be held. Mr. Kerwin charged himself with every care of collecting witnesses and arranging my defense. I was spared the disgrace of appearing publicly as a criminal, as the case was not brought before the court that decides life and death. The grand jury rejected the bill on its being proved that I was on the Orkney Isles at the hour before the body of my friend was found, and not a fortnight after my removal, I was liberated from the prison. My father was enraptured on finding me free from the vexations of being criminally charged, that I was again allowed to breathe the free air and permitted to return to my native country. I did not share these feelings, for to me the walls of a dungeon or a palace were both hateful. The cup of life had been poisoned forever, and although the sun shined upon me as upon those who are happy, I saw around me nothing but dense, frightful darkness, penetrated by no light but the glimmer of two eyes glaring at me. Sometimes they were the eyes of Henry, languishing in death, the dark orbs almost covered by the eyelids and the long black lashes that fringed them. Sometimes it was the watery, clouded eyes of that monster, as I had first seen them in my chamber in Ingolstadt. My father tried to awaken in me feelings of affection. He spoke about Geneva, where I should soon visit, of Elizabeth and Ernst, but this only drew deep groans from me. Sometimes, indeed, I felt a wish for happiness, and I thought with melancholy delight of my beloved cousin, or I longed with a devouring malade du pays to see once more the blue lake and the rapid Rhone that had been so dear to me in childhood, but my general state of being was torpor, in which a prison was as welcome a residence as the most divine scenes of nature, and these fits were almost interrupted by nothing but anguish and despair. At these moments, I often endeavored to put an end to the existence that I hated, and it required unceasing attendance and vigilance to restrain me from committing some dreadful acts of violence. But one duty remained to me, the recollection of which I finally found triumphing over my selfish despair. It was necessary that I should return without delay to Geneva, and there keep watch over the lives of those I loved, and to lie in wait there for the murderer, so that if any chance led me to the place of his concealment, or if he dared again blast me with his presence, I might, with unfailing aim, put an end to the existence of the monstrous being that I had endured with the mockery of a soul. My father still wanted to delay our departure, fearful that I could not sustain the fatigue of a journey. I was a shattered wreck, the mere shadow of a human being. My strength was gone. I was a skeleton, and fever night and day was preying upon my wasted body. But still I urged that we leave Ireland, with such inquietude and impatience that my father decided to yield. We took our passage on board a vessel bound for Havre de Grace, and sailed with a fair wind away from the Irish shore. It was midnight. I lay on the deck looking up at the stars and listening to the dashing of the waves. I listened to the darkness that shut Ireland away from my sight, and my pulse was beating with a feverish joy when I thought that I should soon see Geneva. The past appeared to me in the light of a frightful dream, yet the vessel in which I was on the wind that blew me away from the hated shore of Ireland, and the sea which surrounded me told me forcibly that I was deceived by no visions, and that Clerval, my friend, my dearest companion, had indeed fallen victim to me and the monster I had created. I repassed in my memory my entire life, my quiet happiness while living with my family in Geneva, the death of my mother, my departure for Ingolstadt. I remembered, shuddering, the mad enthusiasm that hurried me on to the creation of my hideous enemy, and I recalled to mind the night when he had first lived. I was unable to pursue the train of thought. A thousand feelings pressed on me and caused me to bitterly weep. Ever since my recovery from the fever, I had been in the custom of taking every night a small quantity of laudanum, for it was by means of this drug only that I was enabled to gain the rest necessary to preserve my life. Oppressed by the recollection of my misfortunes, I now swallowed double my normal quantity and slept profoundly, but sleep did not afford me respite from thought and misery. My dreams presented 1,000 objects that terrified me. Towards the morning, I was possessed by a kind of nightmare. I felt the fiend grasping my neck, and I could not free myself from it. Groans and cries rang in my ears, and my father, who was watching over me, perceiving my restlessness, woke me up. Dashing waves were all around, the cloudy sky above. The fiend was not here, and a sense of security, a feeling that maybe a truce had been established between the present hour and the disastrous future, imparted me with a kind of calm forgetfulness of which humans are particularly susceptible. And that is the end of chapter 4. And yes, I think that is where we are going to end up tonight, with Victor Frankenstein escaping yet again, and again making everything about him. I think that's the thing I don't like about Victor. It's all me, 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 me. I mean, granted, we are all kind of the stars of our own book, the Truman Show of our own Truman Show, or the Truman of our own Truman Show, but he just seems very self-centered. Like, no thought at all about the fact that his best friend is dead, other than the fact that, oh, I am so sad. No thought about his friend's family, about the fact that, maybe he should find out how his friend was killed, why his friend was in this place. No, just, I am so despondent, and now I have been accused of murder. Or maybe it's just all my prejudice, and I just don't like Victor because he struck me wrong when he first woke up the monster, and from then on, I have been very much against him. Anyway, looks like Victor is heading back to Geneva. We'll have to see what happens next. We have 3 more chapters, and we're probably going to do one a night, just looking at how long that lasted. So thank you so much for listening. Sorry it's only 1 chapter, but it was a decent length. So thank you, and I will see you tomorrow. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up. It does always make me smile, and I'll see you next time.